Okay, so good morning everybody. Welcome to the Colloquia Patavina series. As you saw, today we have a couple of prestigious speakers from a prestigious, very known company, which is Intel. So Anand Rajan, which is senior director of the Emerging Security Lab, and also Lily Young is taking part of this second part of the talk, and she's principal engineering in the same lab. It's a great pleasure for us that you're here, that you accepted both our invitation, and thanks also for the ongoing collaboration that we hope to make it stronger in the future. Thanks all for being here. And please.
Thank you for the kind intro, Mauro, and also inviting us to talk at this prestigious colloquium. And I must say it's an honor to be here, I think at one of the oldest, if not the oldest, one of the oldest is better, universities in Europe. So as you see from the title, so we wanted to we wanted to make it slightly interesting, make it a Dickensian title or something. And so, tale of two emerging paradigms. We talk about IoT and 5G. IoT maybe not so emerging. It's been emerging for the last 4 or 5 years, but it's still, a lot of good research going on in that area. And 5G, of course, is kind of the communication technology of the future. And so our focus is going to be on security challenges and opportunities in the space. But the way I thought I structured the talk was because this is the first time, I guess, we were coming here. So I'll do a very quick overview of Intel Labs, which is the research arm of Intel, which Lily and I belong to. Do that quickly, and then I cover the security challenges in IoT, and then I'll call up my colleague Lily, who's here in the front row, and she'll come up and talk about security for 5G. Okay, I think I can skip past that. They force us to put it in every...
So we confirm with that.
There you go. So just this quick overview of Intel Labs. So we have a very focused mission at Intel Labs, which is to deliver breakthrough innovations to fuel Intel's growth and technology leadership. And we have some objectives that make up this mission. So you want to impact the business with a robust pipeline of innovation. That's number one. We have, as part of the mission, one of the objectives is to collaborate with academia, governments, and industry to advance research, amplify the impact, and I guess deliver tremendous value to Intel. I mean, we always try to have some value to Intel, even though there's a lot of ecosystem focus. And finally, we are chartered with leading Intel's transformation into a market-inspired and experience-driven company. And there are 4 major research groups within Intel Labs. The first one in the middle row there, architecture and design. So this is CPU architecture and design. So as you can imagine, this is Intel. So this is kind of bread and butter for Intel Labs. Systems software. So this is where all of the operating system and virtualization kind of research happens. Some of you may have heard about VT, virtualization technology. This lab actually invented VT. Security and privacy is the organization that I belong to, and this is where a lot of the innovation around trustworthy execution environments, new instructions for AES, Galois field multipliers. So pretty much anything you can, true random number generator. So anything you can imagine that has impacted security at a hardware platform level, pretty much came from our lab. And then wireless communication, as the name implies, is all about communication protocols, etc. And again, I'll give you one guess on what their focus is, 5G, right? Now, because that's what everyone is thinking about. We also have 2 functional groups, Intel Labs Europe and Intel Labs China. And basically what they do is they represent the collective research portfolio of these 2 very important geos. Right? So that's kind of Intel Labs on a page. And as some of you may be aware, Intel, and specifically Intel Labs, has had a long history, I think 3 decades or so, of collaborating with academic institutions as well as government agencies all around the world. And over the last couple of decades, we have also had a fairly intense lab-to-lab collaboration with various industry partners. And typically these are on strategic initiatives that would be of mutual interest to both Intel labs as well as the collaborating lab from that company. One thing I'll note here is, we have realized a long time back that collaboration or research cannot be done in isolation, right? So I think the thing I like to quote is, I don't know how many of you know Bill Joy, who was one of the founder of Sun Microsystems. And he, I think, said about nearly more than 20 years back that, no matter how smart you are, I'm quoting Bill Joy, the smartest people always seem to work for someone else. so he was basically saying, without collaboration is kind of the fuel for research, if you will. And so we think of, collaborating with academia as one of the key aspects of this. And to that end, Intel Labs has actually set up a worldwide university network. We call them Science and Technology Centers in the US, ISTC, and Collaborative Research Institutes, ICRI, in Europe and Asia. And basically these ISTCs and ICRIs operate on a hub and spoke model. So there's usually a school that is the hub, leading the whole center, but then spanning multiple spoke schools. And the goal here is to kind of bring together a multidisciplinary committee of the best researchers in a given field, all under the banner of one center, right? And the other thing that we do, which may be innovative in many cases, we actually locate senior Intel researchers. Like in my lab, from my lab, there are 3 people who sit on the TU Darmstadt campus in Germany, I think Maura knows all of them. And they work side by side with researchers. So it's not just sponsor research in academia and you forget it for a year, but it's like literally day-to-day, week-to-week collaboration. So that's kind of very innovative. It has worked very well, hopefully for academia, but definitely for Intel Labs. So I thought, I don't know if you're all in academia. Many of you will be thinking about academic jobs, but some of you may be thinking about industrial research. I thought I'd give you a very quick flavor of what the technology pipeline for Intel looks like, right? So I ask you to visualize this as a 2-dimensional graph. You're all students, this should be easy. Technology maturity increasing on the x-axis and investment level rising on the y-axis. Our academic investments are kind of at the XY intersection point, right? So we are trying to, develop emerging, cutting edge perspectives in emerging domains, but with potential for industry impact, right? So that's what we do at the 0-0 point. Now my organization, Intel Labs' job is to harvest, research, and validate these ideas, right? Working closely with academia in some cases. Then you have the Intel business groups that engage with Intel Labs through a process we call internally joint pathfinding to advance the tech readiness of many of these research concepts. And finally, you have the industry ecosystem that would work with the business units of Intel to bring compelling new products to market. And now you can imagine why the investment level goes up, because as you get closer to product maturity and release, and obviously the technology maturity also increases. But all of that, we think, happens because of the Intel Labs academic, deep engagement, at the bottom right. So that's kind of the model. And here's a very quick snapshot of, not exhaustive, but a whole bunch of things we do in Intel Labs. This is all the way from enabling the Internet of Things to securing your data and devices, ensuring the security, and also pushing the frontiers of things like big data, context-aware computing, and so on. Again, this is not exhaustive, but it gives you a flavor of everything we do in Intel Labs. And now let me just talk very briefly about what we focus on, the initiatives within security and privacy research. This is my organization. We typically like to organize this every 3 years or so, roughly. And I don't know why we picked 4. We always have 4 pillars. The point here is, it's not everything we do, but it allows us to kind of put kind of an external face on 80%, 90% of what we do, right? And so today the pillars that I'll quickly talk about is, we have a data protection pillar. So this is about saying the fundamental research challenge here is, can we protect secrets in a hostile environment, right? And most of the current approaches today focus on isolation. So you're familiar with ARM trust zone, virtualization technology. So these are all using hypervisors to kind of create a safe and an unsafe environment, right? So it's physical separation. But this doesn't scale. These approaches don't scale very well. So one of the paradigm shifts we have been talking about here is, instead of isolation, can we rely on encryption? So now what you do is you take a sensitive workload, and rather than running it in a separate environment, you actually run it on the main CPU, but protect the secrets in plain sight. So that in one line, for people who are familiar, I know Mauro and some of his group is, software guard extensions. That is the fundamental tenet behind this. Use encryption to run everything on the main CPU, but you still get the same level of protections. Another big focus area has been secure multi-party computation, but while preserving the privacy of the data. And there is a number of what I call big data verticals that need this capability, whether it's genomics or finance. The one example usage I like to use, it should apply here too, is you typically in every country you have a transportation safety administration, or the equivalent in Italy, and then there are airlines, right? So at Italia there will be some airline. Now one of the things you can imagine is the transportation administration will typically have a list of suspect individuals, but they don't want to broadly advertise this all the time because there's sensitive information mainly. The airlines have passenger manifests, and they don't want to kind of publish this all the time because there's customer privacy concerns. But the two of them do want to collaborate to stop a terrorist from boarding the flight. So that's kind of one cooked up scenario, but then you can pick genomics, how to take petabytes of data and be able to kind of synthesize it for better discovery against cancer and so on. So there's all kinds of examples in this area, and that's been an active focus. The current approaches here are again not scalable. There are techniques like homomorphic encryption in academia, which is a very interesting area, which is continuing to be pursued but not scalable. And in practice, there are techniques like data de-identification, where you take some data and you kind of chop it off so it doesn't reveal, any or have any privacy concerns. But as you might imagine, you lose entropy in the data. So we think using techniques that are based on trustworthy execution environments, that I talked about earlier, you can actually, operate on this data and come up with results that are both scalable as well as entropy preserved. 5G security is a pretty big area, as I mentioned, mainly because most of the 5G applications are looking to connect, what I call real-time applications like, power grid or self-driving cars, etc. And then there are privacy concerns. And also many of the innovations that are going into the aggressive 5G performance metrics has profound security implications as well. So, 5G security is very important. And finally, security for the IoT. So if you think about, the active interplay of devices that are on you, wearables, with you, such as, smartphones, as well as around you, embedded sensors in the environment, is creating or spawning some very compelling usages. This is the good news. The bad news is, this is, like someone said, it's like Christmas for attackers, because it's just, expanded the threat surface to a point where, there are many more entry points for a determined adversary. So IoT security and all of the challenges is a big focus area for us. So ultimately the goal is really to deliver scalable end-to-end security for usages and platforms. And what Lily and I wanted to do today was basically, this brings us back to the title of the talk. We wanted to focus on two of these areas. Talk about IoT security, I'll do that, and then Lily will talk about 5G security. Okay. Mauro, should we take questions at the end, or I'm happy to? I'm fine. So if there's anything you want to talk about here, because there's I shift gears into the main topics, but if you had any question either on Intel Labs or anything general that Lily and I can answer, I'm happy to stop for a minute. Okay, it's too early in the morning, I think. I'll warm up. Okay, security for IoT. And here, I think what I wanted to do was quickly cover the motivation. Why do we need IoT security? Talk about some challenges and key research problems. And I think the wonderful people here have made sure that I think I had a demo video with sound, and I think they have made sure that it works, so we'll show that. And then summarize. So, let's just start with motivation. So in the last, I want to say 2 or 3 years, there's been an increasing trend of security issues in the IoT context, right? And many of them have made the news headlines. And I thought I'll call out some particularly insidious attacks, on this slide. If you look at the center of the top row there, Shodan is the world's first search engine for internet-connected devices. Some people also refer to it as the scariest search engine on the internet because till date it has collected more than 1 million unique IP addresses of SCADA, control system devices and related software. Proofpoint, a leading security as a service provider, uncovered what may be the first IoT-based cyber attack on the internet involving, I think it was like 750,000 malicious emails from nearly 100,000 smart appliances. This were, things like home router, media center, even a fridge that were, that had been kind of commandeered and basically used as a platform to launch invasive attacks. So what this tells you is cyber criminals are actually commandeering IoT components and transforming them into thing bots for malicious activity. Then there was a light bulb hack from Context Research, where a static pre-assigned key was being used to encrypt the Wi-Fi password among network light bulbs, and simple reverse engineering was able to kind of extract the password from a 30-meter proximity, right? So some of you may wonder what's so great about hacking a light bulb, but then this becomes much more significant if a light bulb is the weak link in a much higher value security chain. So I don't know why a light bulb would be part of your financial system at the bank, but if it is, that would be the entry point, right? So, that's why this is significant. Security is only as good as the weakest link, as you know. So, at the bottom of the slide, I wanted to call out 3 attacks that, if you talk to IoT companies, they would consider these high-value IoT verticals, right? So that's why I thought I would put it up here. So at Usenik Security in 2014, 2-3 years back, University of Michigan research team showed how alarmingly simple it was to hijack city intersections and cause chaos by making all the lights go green, right? And they were able to do this. All they needed was a laptop and the right kind of radio, right? So very, very scary. So that's more of a smart city context. Later that same year at Black Hat, a Central Florida research team, I think this was Jin, who I think some of you collaborate with, they were able to compromise the hardware infrastructure of a Nest thermostat by leveraging a backdoor associated with the boot process. So suddenly, if you're familiar with Nest, you have a learning thermostat in the home, becomes a spy that can not only snoop on the inhabitants in the home, but also become a backdoor into other security functions you may have, like home security system. Yeah. And then, I shouldn't forget this, so at Black Hat 2015, as well as next year, the Jeep attack made all of the headlines, right? And many, many companies started focusing on IoT security. And here, a couple of ethical hackers, Chris Valachek and Charlie Miller, used a zero-day exploit to basically get into the entertainment system of the Jeep and then send commands to the dashboard, steering, etc. All from a laptop that was clear across the country. They didn't even need to physically be anywhere in or close to the Jeep. So hopefully that convinces you that there's enough motivation for people to be wasting their time on IoT security. So what is unique about IoT security, right? So IoT imagines a world where all objects are part of the internet, right? Every object is uniquely identified and accessible to the network. Services and intelligence are added to this expanded internet, and we have suddenly fused the digital and the physical world together. IoT devices like sensors and actuators represent a very constrained environment in terms of power, performance, and cost. It is extremely hard to deliver security for these design points. IoT exposes a much larger threat surface than traditional computing like PCs or smartphones that I showed you earlier. And if you're depending on IoT to mediate day-to-day activity, these systems will become mission critical and need to be robust, survivable, dependable, highly available, and so on. And also one thing to note is a denial of service attack, which you might ignore on a PC, you just reboot, has much more significance in IoT because this may be associated with the healthcare scenario, for example. The fact that the adversary has physical access makes tampering that much easier. Device heterogeneity and multiple protocols, increase the security challenge. And then IoT, like smart meters, don't just get replaced like my PC every 3 years. They last for 20, 30 years, right? So it has a huge impact on things like cryptography, where algorithms and key strings, etc., need to be updated every so often, right? So that's kind of what makes IoT unique. And just so it's the morning, I thought for a little bit of light fun, here's a couple discussing, how because of an IoT catastrophic consequence, they have to go out for dinner because the refrigerator isn't speaking to the stove, right? Now, of course, in hindsight, after I put this, today morning I was thinking, maybe this was a good thing for their marriage. They actually go out on a date or something. But so maybe this is not the best example, but at least it illustrates the point. So IoT is a vast space encompassing multiple different vertical applications, right? So, and they may have very diverse architecture, endpoints, functionality. Some of them concentrate on controlling and managing infrastructure, like smart grid and transportation on the left. Some are very focused on monitoring the surrounding environment, smart buildings, greenhouse, smart factory, etc. in the center. And some others are, handle a lot of cyber and physical assets for the user. So there's medical, retail. I could have put smart home on the right as well. So given all this diversity, you would imagine that threats and solutions for IoT are very diverse. But actually, in our research that we have done in the labs, we see actually a common set of security concerns across all of these verticals, right? And let me illustrate, actually, I'll take 3 usages. I'll try to go through it quickly just to kind of illustrate this point, why I believe there are common security concerns. So if you think of a transportation usage, IoT transportation, there are a couple of applications we looked at. If you think about smart highway, if you, compromising privacy can enable tracking of user location, right? Authenticity is important for proper billing and metering when you're thinking about toll payments. And then safety or lack thereof can compromise life and property. Inventory tracking, again, confidentiality is important to kind of protect the trade secrets of vendors. Authenticity of control commands, again, is important for proper routing of trucks and inventory. And then lack of availability can affect timely delivery of goods, right? So you kind of see, we can collect, the security concerns in literally 3 buckets here. But then let's not stop at transportation. Let's see smart buildings, right? So if you think about building management, the user activity and energy consumption, it's very important to keep this confidential. Otherwise, it can be a privacy invasion. Temperature and HVAC, this is the air conditioning, etc. control commands needs to be authentic, because if you can forge messages, you can overheat spaces and cause tremendous damage to the infrastructure. Elevator control has direct safety issues, because if you jam the communications channel, the entire system can come to a standstill. Think about public infrastructure monitoring for those who follow privacy news. Ever since, privacy concerns have made big news in the post-Snowden era, where this whole thing about trade-off between service delivery, convenience of service delivery versus Big Brother always watching. If alarms cannot be authenticated about their source and content, you might dispatch emergency services in random ways, which is not good. And then as more and more of the digital city, the smart city, is depending on sensing and control, a denial of service attack can just bring the whole city to a standstill. And I don't know how much detail I want to go here, but again, if you look at environmental monitoring, you pretty much, again, we took a couple of applications, you can pretty much see, there are consistently, very, very consistently, there is, these three kinds of, security concerns. So what that says is, we have already understood that the consequences of IoT compromise are catastrophic, right? There is usually life or property at risk, right? So it's not like rebooting your system. And what we conclude is we need a trustworthy, safe, and reliable IoT foundation, right? Without that, I think the usages are very fun and compelling, but at the end of the day, you run the risk of all kinds of bad things happening, right? Where a whole era of computing can come to a standstill if we don't focus on security. So we decided here, as we looked at the space, that there are three major ingredients we think to building such a secure foundation. We need to secure the IoT endpoints or edge devices. We need to secure the connections between edge devices and other entities. And we need to secure IoT end-to-end in some sense, from a life cycle perspective. So what I'll do next is kind of do a very brief introduction into each and try to identify some research challenges. There's an academic community. I figured this might be more compelling for you. So the first challenge here was securing IoT endpoints. And the hypothesis here that all things, meaning all endpoints, need basic security capabilities. And I list some of them here. You need to be able to securely boot up the thing. You need the thing to be able to attest to another thing, so you need remote attestation. You need some sort of a lightweight, trustworthy execution environment to protect execution of software on the thing. And finally, you need crypto, which is some kind of cryptographic capability in those tiny devices, so things can securely transmit, or one thing can communicate to another thing in a secure way. This is a big challenge because of the diversity of these endpoints and edge devices. You can have sensors, actuators, embedded controllers, non-traditional endpoints, etc. As you saw in the light bulb hack I mentioned earlier, even the tiniest mode may need to establish trust in order to make sure that the IoT chain is secure. And security or IoT security is not a black and white proposition, right? So you need just enough security for each thing, so you can then build applications or IoT applications that are end-to-end secure. So the key research challenge in this secure endpoints is very obvious. As capability, cost, and power budgets shrink from more powerful architectures to embedded microarchitectures for wearables, etc. Huge challenges in delivering security at these design points, right? How do you do trustworthy execution environments or attestation, etc. When you're really working within these highly constrained budgets. So that's kind of the big challenge in this space. Moving on, we need to be able to secure IoT connections. So you'll notice that most IoT usages involve an ensemble of heterogeneous devices. And there may be pairwise relationships between devices. They may also operate as groups. When you think about large-scale IoT, like in a smart city, there's another big challenge. A device may need to establish an authenticated connection with a massive number of devices at the same time. So self-learning to establish trust relationships as well as secure channels seems to be the key insight in this space. And finally, usability is a big deal. We need to be able to eliminate manual configuration for the user, right? So we need to make sure that the normal user is able to seamlessly handle their wearables and interact with their smartphone, cars, appliances, etc. And we also want to help the system admin deploy and configure a massive number of devices at the same time. And so the key insight here is we want to build secure channels for diverse ensembles. And by diverse, I mean, this could be, the ensemble could be small, large, massive. It could be static, dynamic. It could also be mobile, stationary. So a lot of diversity, right? So how do you build secure channels for diverse ensembles? And we talk about some key research questions for this phase. The first one is just device-to-device authentication is a big challenge. Many of these devices don't have simple input or output capabilities. So there's no way to type in a password or verify a PIN number on a display. So how do you do device-to-device authentication? Grouping is another challenge. You need to be able to bring the right set of devices together to perform the intended function. And how do you discover these devices? Ungrouping is important as well. So if a device has accomplished its task, or it's out of scope, the group relationship must end. What kind of group topologies are appropriate? Communication paradigm, is it unicast, multicast, broadcast, or some mixture? And then when you think about smart cities, we have to be able to handle, large swarms of devices, and they could be, mobile. Think about cars operating in a city, for example, right? So lots of challenges. And once you have devices authenticated and securely grouped, we have to worry about secure communication of these devices as well, right? So what kind of security services are appropriate for secure communication? And then do we need to come up with customized off-the-shelf protocols for protecting specific IoT applications and workloads? So again, a very healthy set of research questions here. And then I had the last piece of the IoT foundation was securing the IoT lifecycle. The system needs to start, run, and stay secure, right? And this means that the initial and subsequent launch must maintain security. The endpoints or edge devices need to be measurable, attestable to their current status. System execution, this is the run secure part. The system needs to maintain its integrity against malware at runtime. And finally, there needs to be a management system to handle changes, right? Diagnosis, this may need new functions for diagnosis, patching, remote management, etc. And then I already mentioned the security for long-lived devices. So, we have to account for not just patching and updates, but how do you make sure that the crypto survives, the cryptography survives for the lifetime of the device. So what we are really talking about here is cradle to grave secure operation. And there are some key research challenges here as well. So if you think about the kind of start secure piece, what are the right set of primitives for these endpoints? We may need a new lightweight programming framework because these are highly constrained devices. So developers need, the standard programming frameworks may not work for the developers. For the run secure part, we need fast, lightweight, and real-time attestation. We may need a completely new antivirus solution, to protect against malware. For the stay secure part, real-time monitoring and diagnosis. It's not just good enough to be doing offline diagnosis because there are real-world consequences. We need fast reaction to attacks and adversaries. And I already talked about secure update as a, kind of a cross-cutting problem across all these verticals, right? And it's also very different. So if you think about update in an automotive context, they typically like for you to go to a repair shop, for example. But then if you look at a television, it stays unpatched for like 10 or 20 years. So very different models, but there is a common, secure update, at least a policy requirement across all these verticals. Okay, so hopefully that gave you, so I kind of started with motivating IoT security, but then I also wanted to give you a framework for thinking about IoT security. So those were the kind of the three vectors and the associated research problems. And then what I thought I would bring here was, luckily I had a video because it was very hard to bring an actual demo when you're traveling, come do a talk. But this demo, just to do a little bit of setup, I mentioned earlier that we work collaboratively with academia. So one of the collaborations engagements we have that Professor Conti is very familiar with is an Intel Collaborative Research Institute in Darmstadt in Germany. And the work we have been doing over the past 5 years is what is represented in this demo. And from a setup standpoint, we were looking at a vehicle attack scenario, right? So if you think about the modern vehicle, there are thousands of embedded control units, as well as, this just starts playing. So maybe I should back up here. And so, thousands of embedded control units, as well as networks, car area networks, FlexRail, LIN, etc., all creating a very large attack surface. But arguably the most critical component here is the telematics system. So this is things like, in the US, it's like GM OnStar, I think Mercedes has Embrace, BMW has Assist, etc. So if you're familiar with these telematics systems, they have either voice or cellular connectivity, to kind of the backend, right? And so this becomes kind of a extremely vulnerable entry point for the adversary. And once you have compromised the telematics system, that can be a jumping off point to go affect the acceleration system or some other more critical component of the car. And when you think about now the rage is autonomous systems and self-driving cars, etc., again, like a former colleague of ours used to say, this is Christmas for security researchers, right? So there's job security for the next 10 years, or research job security for the next 10 years. So that's kind of the setup. And what we will show in the demo is our TU Darmstadt team working with my lab actually construct an attack through the telematics system, and then show how you can they were using toy race cars, how you can kind of compromise the acceleration system and cause the car to go flying off the track. And then by using some very lightweight, trustworthy execution environment, you are able to detect the memory violation and then stop that event from happening and institute some fail-safe policy, right? So that's kind of the setup. So now let's just
Modern cars today consist of a large number of embedded computers called ECUs, connected using automotive buses such as CAN. These perform a wide variety of functions, ranging from engine management to entertainment and remote telematics. Arguably, the attack surface presented by the telematics system is one of the most critical. This subsystem provides connectivity via cellular networks and enables a broad range of features such as accident reporting, diagnostics, and anti-theft. In this exploit scenario, a remote attacker exploits a bug in the telematics and GSM driver in order to inject malicious code which will yield a remote shell on the telematics system. The attacker can then use the CAN subsystem to send arbitrary commands to other ECUs. The candidate might be the ECU responsible for throttle control. It is inevitable that any code beyond a trivial level of complexity will have bugs. While it is desirable to reduce to the bare minimum the amount of code we need to trust, the security technologies which can enable this do not scale down to ECU class devices. Working in conjunction with TU Darmstadt, we have developed a lightweight, hardware-enforced isolation mechanism we term execution-aware memory protection. Using this feature, we can protect critical software and hardware peripherals from compromise, regardless of whether other software components, such as the OS, have been exploited.
So really, I think what this was trying to show you is, using features which today don't exist in, low-end devices, etc., embedded control units, and so on. You can actually be able to go, so if you have some sort of a security architecture you're constructing within the car network, but then all of these, the tiniest devices, the ECUs, etc., are security capable, then you can actually construct a solution where you can detect violations and be able to institute some kind of fail-safe policy, right? So as opposed to flying off the track, the car comes to a control stop, right? So whatever your policy might be is now implementable, but you need these capabilities in order to make that happen, right? So that was kind of the thesis. So to summarize, I hope I've at least convinced you that a trustworthy, safe, and reliable IoT foundation is essential, right? This comprises securing the endpoints as well as the connections, but also security from cradle to grave, the whole security lifecycle aspect. And the big challenge, if I look across those ingredients, is scaling IoT securely. There are two forms of scaling. One is scaling down to extremely resource-constrained environments. How do you deliver all these features in a tiny mode? As well as scaling across billions of IoT endpoints. So there is all these heterogeneous endpoints, and you need to now be able to construct kind of a secure ensemble out of all of these, right? So the scaling across part is a big challenge as well. And then, again, this is where, as an academic audience, I think this worries companies, but this should be thrilling for academic audience because there is significant research challenges to build such a trustworthy foundation. Okay? So I think that's the end of the IoT security section. So I'll stop here, and then as Lily is coming up here, I'm happy to, if there's any burning questions in your mind, feel free. Otherwise, I guess what I should do while that's happening is transfer the.
I'm not sure whether we want to, first of all, let's thank and if you want to take a couple of questions, maybe for Anand now, or we can also
take it at the end if you want. Yeah.
Bigger discussion. Any question? Yeah.
As you said about encryption in processors at the earlier of your presentation, I want to ask if there is any work performed about this issue or not.
For IoT, you mean?
No, before our IoT.
Right.
Prevention, protection. You said a part. That topic was protection.
Right.
Protecting data.
Right. Well, so for protection, I think the technology I was talking about is software guard extensions, SGX. But your question may be different. If you can ask
yes,
again.
About the hardware. You said something at the recent research of Intel is about putting securing hardware and processor. Everything is on the processor
Right.
for securing data.
Right.
I want to know, is there any work have done about this issue or not?
Well, securing hardware, by that what I meant was a lot of what we do in hardware
Yes.
is creating a foundation, right? Because most of the applications, there is a stack. So you can never ensure complete security in hardware, right? I mean, because ultimately there is a system stack all the way up to the application. What I was talking about there was putting features in hardware that allow an operating system or a web service or an application, whatever may be the case, to build a secure solution. So I guess the answer, if I understand your question correctly, is no, I can't deliver complete security in hardware, but I can create the foundational elements. For example, I was talking about in encryption, I was talking about AES new instructions. So if your AES advanced encryption system was using these instructions, you would have side channel prevention, etc., or at least resistance against side channels and so on. So you can get help from hardware, but hardware will not solve the, because in an open system where people are all putting all kinds of things to construct a system, the only way to get security is that entire system has to be secure.
Intel hasn't done anything about this.
No, Intel has done a lot about it, but in hardware. So what I'm saying is the entire solution needs all the other vendors, right? So Cisco does routers, Microsoft does operating system. So until someone is taking an application and putting an end-to-end secure solution, you won't have complete solution. Intel has done a lot of stuff in hardware security. And I can point you to, we can send a link to the web page, etc. which
I'll give you a question. Because most of the time, when you think about end-to-end security, you automatically go to securing your data, ensuring provenance, etc.
Yeah.
But if you are building open systems, so of course, the visionaries say, and you will dynamically aggregate services in whatever manner. Even without that, there are non-functional characteristics, features of the systems that might be attacked without poisoning the data. A small example. In control loop, you somewhat degrade the performance of a component so that the loop is not timed correctly.
Right.
And you generate a resonating system.
Right.
So, how do you consider that? Has it been taken into account somewhere, or?
No, so the challenge becomes, so that's where I think the challenge with security is that no one wants to actually pay for security, right? Because, I mean, if you think about it, security is painful. You come in the way of usability or something else. So there is some bigger goal, and security is trying to tell you no. And so the best way to kind of deal with security is, it's, I think in one of my slides I said just enough security.
Yeah.
So what you have to do is you have to do kind of a comprehensive analysis of that usage. And you may be able to come up with a very optimal security solution. It's like, I think of security 20 years back when I started in security, I was like everyone else. I thought, you have security or you don't have security, right? Black, white. But what you realize after 20 years of being in an industrial lab is
one size
doesn't fit all. And what you actually have to do is a deep analysis, come up with security requirements and threat model at a level that you never did before, and then use that and use all of the features to construct the solution.
But you also have to hope that your system is never used in a way that you didn't expect.
And that's another problem, because as engineers and researchers, we do this analysis, we do all of the reviews, and we put it out. And then a bunch of marketing people are going to talk to customers and they say, oh, you can use it for this. Oh, sure, I'll take more money and do this. Right, but again, some discipline has to be, so what we have been doing internally within Intel, I don't know if it catches everything, is we have put some disciplines on not just all the research and fun stuff we do. There's a whole thing called a security development lifecycle. So there's a whole community that does assurance analysis of all the products, and they inform the general manager of some business unit that these are the risks. Now, if the GM still decides to go ahead for business reasons, he understands the risks, right? So it's that's handled by process, security process and this.
Thank you.
Okay.
Other questions?
Yes.
You mentioned the problem to combine scaling down in terms of devices,
Right.
resources, and complexity, and scaling up with
Yeah.
respect to the number. What is, in your opinion, the biggest problem, or at least the most urgent problem for design security in scaling down with respect to resources? Is that the complexity of cryptographic algorithms, or the complexity of security protocols,
Right.
or like the number of agents that need to interact, and so on?
So actually, at the end of the day, it has been for us, and we have done a lot of work actually in my lab in this area, where we have tried to go down to really, again, IoT is a very broad spectrum, right? So when we say IoT, it sounds like, oh, I'm talking about this. No, you're talking about this, right? It's a very diverse spectrum. There are much more capable IoT, like embedded controllers and HVAC units, etc. And then there is maybe the IoT that goes on a ring, or the tiniest. So when you're thinking about this, what we have done, because we are research, we don't have that much resources, we have tried to pick a couple of points on the spectrum and said, what are the fundamental security capabilities that you might want to deliver? And we came up with 4. We said, everything, thing means Internet of Things, the thing needs to boot up securely, meaning it has to securely come up to some good state. Then once it has come up to the good state, multiple of them, a second thing needs to be able to remotely attest to this thing, mutual attestation. Then the third capability is each of these things needs to run software securely, a trustworthy execution environment. And then the fourth capability is some cryptography so you can communicate securely between things. So maybe there's 1 or 2 more, but we said these are fundamental capabilities, and we just proved internally in research that you can implement it on a couple of points of the spectrum. Saying you can, so we didn't obviously cover everything, but we have been slowly kind of where possible trying to, so lightweight crypto, lightweight trustworthy execution environments, we have something we have standardized called enhanced privacy ID for remote attestation. It's a group signaturing scheme. And so things of that sort, just to...
This thing still may run rather complex communication protocols.
Yes, yes.
So
right.
that
Because
probably also fit security.
that's also fit security. And I guess the model you have to look at is when you have like a complex heterogeneous ensemble of things, you can say each thing, there are a whole bunch of things that may be security capable. By that I mean it has these 4 capabilities, for example. And then you may have a set of things that can never ever have security. But there what you say is, you're going to collect all those things and put a gateway that's more capable. And you should never be able to get at those things directly. You have to go through the gateway, right? So security architectures have to be constructed very carefully. Otherwise, you're just open.
Questions? Really doesn't mind, I would like to raise also
Okay.
a couple of issues,
Yeah.
but I would like to know what's your take on these 2 issues.
Okay.
First one is awareness, second is liability.
Okay.
I think they both become much more complex in the IoT world.
Right.
And in terms of awareness, for example, you mentioned that security is key, but I remember I was in a partner's talk recently showing some Gartner prediction of how much companies will invest on IT,
Right.
how much of this investment will be on security, and the security part was small.
Yeah.
Maybe we as researchers might be happy because that will be the Christmas for researchers on security, because that will be definitely a lot of problem if you don't invest in security.
Right.
But I think if we don't invest in security, there will be lack of security and systems will be more vulnerable, like this. Which one is? Okay, so on the awareness part, the question basically is, what do you think we as researchers, or maybe also companies, should do to basically increase the awareness so that there will be a demand for security?
Right.
And in terms of liability, that also I think will become much more complex. What's your take on this? How will it be enforced? If one of those cars will crash, who is responsible? Intel because of the chip or?
Right. So let me take the first one. The awareness I can speak to a little bit. Liability, let's talk about liability as well. But on awareness, I think it's, I'll make 2 observations. One is, I think I agree with you. As a research community, as people who are security professionals, the more we can do, through research, through publications, through companies, the security arms of companies, actually, really raising the profile of this subject. And it's really about talking about it, publishing, etc. I think we can do a lot for awareness. We are always dealing with the challenge with security. Like I said, it's not the, how should I call it, the sexiest topic. People really, if they can escape paying for security, they want to escape paying for security, right? That's how companies have operated traditionally. So I think this awareness thing becomes very important. But the one thing I think that is working well for us in IoT is the real-time consequences of failures, right? Because I remember the PC generation, or actually the way I'll tell the story is I joined Intel about 21 years back, long time. But I clearly remember even within Intel, if I was describing my tenure at Intel, I think there have been 3 eras of security within Intel. The first era in the late 90s, we were just like a small team starting in a corner, doing some standards work. You mentioned security, they kick you out of the room. Right? So we did a lot of useful work, but we were not popular, right? No one is like, who cares about security? The beginning days of the internet. The only reason we existed was people were talking about e-commerce. They thought, oh, maybe I need some security, so we'll have these people. But security was not popular. The next decade in the 2000s, this is when TPM and TCG and all this came up. Our labs was very involved. Security started becoming important for companies, but if you have a list of 5 priorities, it was number 6, because you have power and performance and cost and all kinds of other things, right? So, but you were starting to become. But in the last 5 years, 6 or 10 years, I've noticed, security has become a first-order principle now. Even Intel acquired McAfee, for example, right? Many companies have made moves where they think you can not just have security to stop the blood from flowing or something, a breach, but you can monetize security. You can make money of security, right? So the thinking has evolved even in my term at Intel. And the other reason, connecting it back to IoT, is that the fact that you can have loss of property or life in IoT works to our advantage. I know it's scary, but the point is people realize that, right? So one thing that's very funny is we are now launching this whole initiative around security for autonomous systems. We are starting in ICRI in Europe. And I was so happy because usually you have to promote the need for these things. And then 2 weeks back, my wife takes me to this, says, oh, there's a new movie, let's go watch this. It's called, I don't know how many have you heard, you may not care, but it's called Fate of the Furious, right? I'm not recommending the movie. but this movie, there's a 5-minute YouTube video, if you can catch it on YouTube or something, you should catch it. For 5 minutes, they take the New York City metro area, and there is a bad person, actually some lady called Viper or something, and she is trying to assassinate some Russian diplomat who's traveling in an entourage. And they compromise all of the autonomous systems in New York City, route that whole procession in a certain direction, stop it in front of some BMW showroom or something, and again using autonomous drive thing, make the cars fall on top of the and basically achieve their job, right? So they basically in 5 minutes compromised 90% of the autonomous self-driving cars in New York City, right, enabling the auto drive function. And it was beautiful. It's like Hollywood advertising your, the need for your research. So what I'm getting at is awareness is increasing, especially in the IoT and autonomous systems. And the second one, liability, my short thing is that's where my expertise does stop, because what happens is when my lab is getting into areas like multiparty analytics for genomics, etc. Not just in self-driving cars, there is a liability question about what happens if something goes wrong, right? So from a research lab, what we have been doing is we have been trying to raise awareness with our legal side. And then sometimes we can provide technological tools saying, hey, you know what, we can do formal analysis of this part that will raise the assurance of this subsystem. So we can give you some tools, but please work with your legal community and start putting some structure around this. So, but unfortunately, beyond that, I don't think.
Goes beyond
our expertise.
comfort zone,
Exactly.
But since hardware can be the root for
Exactly.
security, maybe can be also the root for verifying or assessing.
Exactly. That's what I meant by formal verification. So what we are telling our legal people is, we can give you higher assurance that this works by doing certain things, which raise the cost of the product, but it decreases the liability, the risk profile. So there are some technological aspects we are telling them we can provide, but you have to start having this conversation, because it's not just about building a self-driving car and just putting it on the road. You have to go solve this whole problem before you start doing self-driving cars. In fact, Germany, I think, just announced the ability to do autonomous systems in Germany. Their only mandate is there has to be a human in the car who can take control if the autonomous system is actually not functioning.
Okay. Thanks a lot.
Okay.
I want to delay further the second part of the talk. So let's
Thank you.
Anand again.
Hi, my name is Liability. I'm also from Intel Labs. So I'm going to talk about the 5G portion of this. I spent quite a few years in the wireless research first before I come in joining the security community. So we'll talk about 5G. So just a quick slide on the mobile network evolution. I think we all live in today with LTE, 4G, and historically has been we have observed that almost every decade we'll have a evolution step in this with the mobile network, right? We started with the analog network in the 80s, and then by the time we get to 3G was about in the beginning of the century. We have much more widespread use in the world across the globe, and LTE really gave us the high bandwidth mobile network internet, right, on everybody's phones. So what is 5G? You know, why do we need 5G? Is that really about even higher data rate? I mean, if you look at the revolution from analog to 4G, it has been really mostly about increasing the data speed, right? So is that it?
Just the space bar.
Oh, okay. So actually, I think 5G, at least in my mind, and I think a lot of people agree, is not really just about the super higher speed anymore. For the first time, I think there is a lot more focus on the new set of applications that the cellular connectivity is going to enable. And Anand talked about IoT, and that's all about things, right? So 5G also is really about connecting not just people, but things. Because if you think about today, everybody has a phone already, so pretty much we saturated the connectivity for people, right, on the globe. And so things are really the next frontier, and this is where all the new requirements come about for 5G. And so here I'm showing this triangle to demonstrate sort of the three set categories of the devices and applications that 5G is supposed to enable. And at the top is the enhanced mobile broadband. This is what we are more familiar with. With the phones, you use that to access the mobile internet, right? So that, is really more focused on the higher speed. We're talking about now multiple gigabit seconds. To enable some of the new applications like, virtual reality, 3D video, really high resolutions kind of video and VR applications. But more interesting is at the bottom, those two endpoints that in this triangle is, on one side you have this massive machine type communication that is more categorized by the number of devices, but each device is small. They don't send a lot of data, right? They may be sending the thermostat sending some data about the temperatures, or the smart meter sending about the power consumptions, but they don't send, each of them does not send a lot of data, but it's the number of them that is the challenge. So that's on one side of the applications for all the things. On the other side, we have new set of applications that really focus on ultra reliability and low latency. So this is the real-time aspect that Anand talked about. Like autonomous car need to make real-time decision constantly, right? And a smart factory needs to have a very reliable network to enable, very low latency, because the control loop, the proper function of the control loop in the factory depends on that. So that is a new set of requirements that the traditional mobile network have not really dealt with. The most stringent and demanding application so far is really video streaming. And that's really, we're talking about still more of a human perception kind of a latency. Here, it's a magnitude or two, lower. So, with that in mind, then, there's a lot of study already kind of capturing the requirements from all those different applications. On the left, so you have this graph showing this, multiple dimensions of different performance metrics, right? About the data rate, the range, the error capacity, and energy consumptions, and then the density, capture how many devices within a small area that you need to support. And then the latency, we're talking about, 10 to 10 milliseconds, for example. Instead of today, it's more like the hundreds of milliseconds latency. And then, mobility. So that's the sort of the dimension of the metrics that we were going to measure the performance of 5G. On the right, I like this graph from NYU better because it sort of highlights these 3 different categories of applications that I talked about earlier. They kind of pull you into different directions. So they not all point you, from a designer's point of view, into the same kind of design. So, at the bottom you have enhanced mobile broadband. That really focuses on extreme data rates. Okay. So those require certain kind of innovations at the physical layer of the radio to enable that. And then the extreme capacity from the network's point of view, right? But if you look at the massive Internet of Things on the sort of left upper corner, that really focuses on ultra low energy consumption, right? Because those devices, that is really the constraint that they have. And very low complexity and ultra high density, because then you're going to have a lot of them. And think of like a swarm of drones, for example, to accomplish a certain task. And then on the right, upper right left, is that the mission critical control application that we talk about. That really focuses on what? Latency, ultra high reliability. And here, for the first time, strong security for this set of applications becomes really, really important. Why? Because it ties back to other attributes that really people care about. Safety, right? And functional reliability. And those things, people, in certain applications, people are willing to pay for. So this really highlights sort of the challenge for the whole mobile community today. The whole industry is facing this, very different kind of requirements coming from different applications. And how do you satisfy that with the one single network? That is the challenge. So what I'm going to use for the rest of the talk is really use one application because, as I said, it would point you to different, aspects. There's, an army of researchers really in the industry and academic focusing on 5G right now. So I'm going to use one applications, vehicular communications, V2X is vehicle to everything, to really demonstrate sort of the challenges that we face, especially around security in the context of 5G. So let me define V2X first, right? This stands for vehicles to everything. There are other names, that the research community have used before, vehicular area networks, cars to cars, connected cars, cooperative intelligent transportation system, always focus on the connected aspect of it, right? So the vision here is really for the vehicles to leverage this external entities, information coming from the external entities to complement onboard sensors to enhance driving experience. So in parallel to this connected car vision, there is always, all the discussion and excitement about autonomous driving. The focus on autonomous driving has always been using onboard sensors and the intelligent machine learning system to really collect those information and understand the environment around you and then make decisions for the driving, right, in real-time fashion. And this is a complementary vision. It's about using information coming from outside of your cars, from other cars or from the infrastructure to complement that, the same end goal, okay? And so the application and the specific motivation for that could be safety, right? Because the sensors that you have on the car has a limited range. So this information coming from other cars, they can give you information that your onboard sensor cannot see in the short time. So you will not be able to see around the corner, but the other car can tell you, I'm traveling on this road and at this speed. And if the sensors don't detect that, at least that information is a complementary piece of information that can provide, stronger safety. For energy saving, for example, a group of cars traveling much closer than what you and I would feel comfortable with the human sort of perception delay, But with car-to-car communication, you can allow that distance much shorter, and this will save you energy. This is especially compelling for like trucking company with a fleet of trucks, and for convenience, toll collections, or for route planning and knowing the road conditions ahead of time, but in more or less real time will help you plan your route better. And then traffic optimization, right? People talk about the vision. When you come to intersection, you can, today you can, with the traffic lights, you can manage so that you drive the car at the right speed so that you don't need to stop. But eventually you can do away with the traffic lights and the cars just communicate with each other and then they weave, as they cross each other. So what are the security and privacy challenges here? So let's talk about the privacy first, right? So the fundamental challenge in this kind of vision for consumer is that it seems like a perfect way for the big brother to track everything, right? Now you can track the cars, track the users and the passengers and drivers. So that is the number one concern that we need to address as we design such applications, is to make sure that you preserve the anonymity for both the people in the car and the cars itself. And so that you would not be able on a long-term basis to track one car to as it travels through the space and time. At least in the US Department of Transportation is evaluating the technology called DSRC, which is not based on cellular, it's based on Wi-Fi, but for the same set of applications. That is sort of the first instantiation of this vision, right? But I think some of those, the challenges that they faced, I think the 5G community is going to face the same way. So Department of Transportation in the US make it very clear that at least for the system that they're designing, it prevents the personal sensitive information to be stored for long term, and other than the very short time that used for the safety crash avoidance applications. But then on the other hand, you have some conflicting requirements here, right? Where the unique ID and tracking is legitimately required. For example, if you're involved in an accident, you wanted to be able to demonstrate what happened, and so you wanted to have some kind of for legal forensics or insurance purpose that produce some evidence that's with the non-repudiation property, so that there's no ambiguity what actually happened. And then there's the cellular network always has to satisfy lawful intercept requirements, which is under a proper court order that some of the communication will be intercepted and tracked by the law enforcement. So you need to satisfy that when it's appropriate. And that OEM, even the vendors, right? For the cars, they wanted to be able to do recall. So they need when something goes wrong, a component is default, and they need to upgrade it and fix it. You need to be able to recall those systems. So you need to know what are the cars, components, functions, and how they when it's appropriate to recall them. And then there's also, because of all this concern about security, we need to protect against misbehaving or malicious cars that's on the road, doing something bad. And so you need to be able to actually identify them and report them, right? So that is sort of the dilemma and the research challenge is how do you come up with a mechanism that satisfy the first requirements, but when it needs to and when it's appropriate, you also will be able to enable the other application that we talked about that needs to identify, right? The user and the car. And then in terms of security challenges, right? When you think about communication between the cars and the car with the infrastructure, you need to do you need to first secure communications. So between the cars and the infrastructure, the messages that carry over this communication and all the other elements supporting that message exchange need to be authenticated, sometimes encrypted, but a lot of time depends on application. The more important is integrity protected, right? So you don't want the message to be altered in any way because you're going to make decision based on that information, right? So the other part of this is that it's not just about from one radio to another, you need to protect the channel between them, but it's really about, the data integrity end to end. So the fundamental question is, if my car is going to make decisions that affect my safety based on information coming from other cars, strangers, right, that I encounter on the road randomly, can I trust those cars? Can I trust the data I receive from those cars? So now it goes beyond the communication channel. It's really about the ultimate data that carry from those sources. So if one of the cars is compromised because of a telemetric hack, and some data is injected over other car, it can still be properly signed and authenticated and everything, but the data itself is being compromised at the source of the other car, right? So this is a much harder problem. It goes beyond just communications. You need other mechanism to ensure that, right? Or if complete prevention is not possible, then at least you should be able to detect that when the data is compromised. And then also this, the whole, so 100 millions of cars here on the road. So there's a lot of organization, structure, and process are involved in designing, enabling this kind of infrastructure. So those entities need to be also satisfying the security requirements so that, they are not the weak link and entry point for malicious attack. So scalability, like I said, other requirements are scalability to hundreds of millions of cars, and then low latency to meet the real-time requirements. So this just shows you in a connected car system, how you take those informations and to make the decision, right? So let's start from the bottom. So those kinds of information coming from other cars on the right, you're gathering those information from the cars. Those information can come like very raw sensor input even. So beyond just simple information, you can imagine if my car has a lot of sensors, other cars have a lot of sensors, you can actually have, we call it cooperative perception, meaning that you can see through other cars' eyes. So a lot of the raw input from other sensors through other cars can be, coming in. That requires very higher data rate, right? Or it can come from the top, which is more process result in other cars. After the filtering and pre-processing, the other cars send more simple information, lower data rates information. So either way, you're getting those information, and then you're gonna inside the car do, your predictions and trajectory planning based on the information. And on the left side, you have this box. We have interpretation and plausibility check. This is where I think the most important piece to think about how do I protect against those kind of data or malicious data injection through other cars. Because the communication channel might be protected, but if the other car is compromised, this is where I think you can use all this data there's a lot of physical, logical redundancy in the data as the cars travel on the road. You still, even if it's malicious car, inject and compromise certain part of the sensors. As long as not all the sensors and not all the cars are compromised, right? Then at least you can use some of those machine learning maybe here to do the plausibility check and see, does this data even make sense, right? Or is it contradicting with other data that I get either from my own sensor or from other cars? And that's where you can filter out and detect some of those attacks, potentially. So we talked about the V2X in the concept of, in the context of really between the cars. But there was a whole back-end network from the operators, right? Your Vodafone or AT&T, that they need to enable in their data center, in their basically the operator's data center, to enable and ensure the security. So there's a lot of requirements there. I'm going to just really brief mention, like the idea that you have one physical network, and then you're going to support the cars, your phones, all the IoT devices, and they all have different requirements. So how do you slice the network logically and virtually so that you can enable and isolate those different set of applications? That's called network slicing. So that's one huge new concept that is being worked on. And then this whole software-defined networking and network function virtualization really is a way to allow all these different services being deployed dynamically in the network. Again, this is from the operator's point of view, and that's very important too. And then there are some specific requirements for low latency support. So in order to do that, traditionally, your phone cannot talk to my phone directly, right, today. You have to go to your tower and then, eventually get back to my phone. That's how the connection is. It's always through the infrastructure. That's really taking too long, okay, for some real-time applications. So you need direct radio-to-radio, direct device-to-device communication between the cars. Really, we're talking about locally, right, without going to the infrastructure. So that's a new kind of radio access mechanism need to be enabled there. And then in order to allow this kind of really short latency, sometimes you need to have local intelligent roadside units right there serving the cars around you, and with a lot of intelligence, again, so that you don't need to go all the way back to network in the back end. So those need to happen as an infrastructure. And then we're also deploying at the radio access network, multiple towers and multiple base stations are going to serve each individual device so that you have diversity. If one is being jammed or unavailable, you have another one you can fall over. And that will also help with the security and availability. Okay, so in summary, just using the vehicle application, that's really a one single application. But as an example use case, you see that that's really what 5G is about. Is really about those things, right? And we talk about each application has different challenges, and so there's a lot of innovation to enable that. And so this is actually a very exciting area for wireless, communication researcher and a security researcher. Thank you.
Probably you mentioned that in this vehicle to everything, of getting information from other for external sources, secure. There's a lot of resemblance to the problem of secure data aggregation in sensor networks, for instance. Mm-hmm. But the main difference I see is that typically in sensor network, you can deploy the sensors and they stay there for a long time.
Right.
Whereas here, you're moving your car, so the counterpart you meet in the street is ever changing. New, you cannot rely on, let's say, prior, so I don't know, credentials, prior trust relationship.
Exactly.
So how do you think this can be? We can of course use a lot of the solutions that were thought for secure data aggregation, but this problem is kind of new, and how do you think, what would be the direction to explore?
Right. That precisely is the challenge. It's because it's dynamic, it's random, and the other car is different vendors, right? Served by different operators. Maybe it's roaming right into the area, and so I think depends on the technology. In 5G, it's part of the cellular. At least you have the cellular infrastructure that hopefully the cars coming to the market should have come again, with the modem, with the SIM, has some kind of authentication, just like the phones that you have. So there is some trust relationship already established between the cars
So the
and the
hierarchy
network.
through the network.
Through the network. And then the next question is, based on that, you can bootstrap the trust relationship between the cars, right? But at least you have something to start, somewhere to start. Yes.
That's it.
Other thing used to in sensor networks they used to talk about, but didn't get much attention because I guess things were static.
Mhm.
There was this notion of spontaneous group formation and dissolution, meaning
Yeah.
you bring together a group for a particular task and you disband the group.
Okay.
That has more synergy with this whole mobile transportation
Right,
kind of
right,
scenario.
yeah.
So some of that, even though that research, no one did much research because of the static nature, but that was talked about 10 years back as well. But that may have more resemblance with the challenges.
Yeah, as you move through, you'll have very dynamic group. So there are research people looking at that too.
Other questions? Okay, so we didn't go through the last topic we covered yesterday after the V2X. Then we need the G2X. We'll do to infrastructure. So we just came up yesterday with this new pattern. Okay, apart from this joke, I mean,
I should have put a gondola there.
Yeah. So apart from the joke,
Missed
I mean,
opportunity.
we really have already collaboration ongoing with Intel specifically on this topic, and we had a group meeting just before, and we saw that actually there are a lot of new promising directions that you can add, and they are very keen to open the collaboration to host like internship for students or for those that want to do like a master's thesis on an interesting topic, challenging topic, get in touch with a great company, and do a nice experience. I mean, they're more than welcome. And of course, I strongly encourage you this. And okay, I think with this we can close the talk. I would say stay foolish, but don't need to be angry because we are going to have a coffee break. So if you want to join the coffee break. And thanks again, Inter speakers.